Are you questioning your reality? Do you feel gaslighted? It's not you. It's the media. I am Suchitra Vijayan and I'll be joined by Bhakti Shringarpure and Madhuri to eviscerate the propaganda, set the record straight and offer much needed moral clarity. Tune in each week. It's not you, it's the media, a podcast by the Police Project.
Hey, this is Bhakti. Welcome to It's Not You, It's the Media. And today's episode is called Fawning over Kamala. And we are going to dissect and dive into the media circus that has ensued ever since Kamala Harris was announced as the Democratic nominee for president. Kamala Harris is our current vice president. Everyone knows that. And you know that there were a lot of kerfuffles and Joe Biden has had to step down. And everyone's extremely excited to have this half Indian, half Jamaican, woman of color, prosecutor lady out there. And she would be the first female president if she is elected. And that's nothing to sneeze at in a country very deeply marred by sexism and where there have not been significant women in leadership positions. So we understand why this is an important moment, but we're also quite shocked at how intensely gaslighting the media has been and having zero critical analysis, having zero analysis really about who she is, what her policy is, and what has really happened ever since she accepted the nomination. Primarily, I think we're going to think of this as three waves. The first wave of media coverage started at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago when Kamala gave her acceptance speech. The media went into raptures. They were frothing at the mouth. Celebrity activism was at a peak level, and there was absolute uncritical idolation. The second wave happened when she gave a CNN interview along with Vice President nominee Tim Walz. And then the coverage got slightly more critical. We were asking questions like, what is her policy exactly? Is this all fluff? It wasn't particularly critical, but it was slightly moving towards it. And then the third wave was the highly viral, most watched debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, which happened last week. And we were back to fawning and frothing at the mouth. The little bit of criticality that had seeped in was also lost. We're primarily looking at liberal mainstream media because this is where we think all the gaslighting really happens. We are not covering right-wing media at all. We are concerned with the media that claims to be progressive, that claims to be critical, and that's where we'll start. And I'm going to turn to you, Suchitra, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Democratic National Convention and what the ethos was, what the mood was, and how it was covered.
The DNC was covered in a way, it felt like a Taylor Swift concert. The aesthetics, the way it was produced, who was there, the way in which the people were dressed, it really felt more like a Taylor Swift concert geared towards a TikTok, a younger generation audience. Almost even the speech patterns were all, it felt like it was being geared really towards a kind of a virality and a TikTok moment where you could pull a 5-second, a 10-second clip. And as you saw soon after the DNC, you really saw not the essence of the speech, not the moments. One of the moments that went really viral was Obama basically, doing this, and then this kind of, flagging to Trump's insecurity, but also kind of the double meaning. Apart from that, what you really saw was all kinds of people coming in. In a Democratic convention, you had more Republicans take stage. You had families of Israeli hostages, but of course, Palestinians were both visibly absent from the convention. One of the other things that the media did not cover during the convention was how pro-Palestinian protesters were both attacked and their protest signs were taken away. It was also a moment for Obama's to come back. It was a fashion moment where really poor fashion was described as high fashion. There was a lot of, again, uncritical fawning over Obama and Michelle Obama. And of course, Clinton's appeared. And what you really saw, as I said, was this was a deeply orchestrated, aesthetically created convention that really lacked very little substance, but really felt more like a victory lap than a Democratic convention.
Yeah. I think that sort of all originated with Charlie XCX's endorsement of Kamala as Brat. And I feel like a lot of that neon theme was very present in Kamala's campaign, as well as in the DNC. And about this, like, the virality and the capture of youth, they aren't necessarily the base, the Democratic voting base, but obviously they are a block that the Democrats seem very eager to capture. So we saw a lot of these very cringy explainers, I want to say, about how Kamala is Brat, and obviously
What is
this.
BRAT? Somebody tell me what BRAT is. First of all,
I can
I'm
tell
so
you what
old.
Brat is. So this is according to the BBC. I'm going to read. Basically, Charlie XCX says that her vision of Brat is, quote, a girl who is a little messy and likes to party and maybe says some dumb things sometimes, and someone who has a pack of cigs, a Bic lighter, and a strappy white top with no bra. So that's the artist's vision. And this writer for the BBC says that brat culture is basically empowerment with a side of hedonism. The party girl with an existential crisis, the urge to throw all caution to the wind in favor of having fun. And there are some
So,
elements of this that are apparently present. Cringe
wow,
in
wow,
in
wow.
Kamala. And basically
So
the
Kamala is Brat.
Kamala's brat, because the part of the allure of being a brat in the mold of Charlie lies within its embrace of authenticity and its defiance of expectations. For the contemporary brat, youth is nothing to be ashamed of, and imperfections are proof positive of humanity. So Kamala has this, but in true brat fashion, in the face of harsh criticism, she seems less concerned with being palatable than with doing her job, despite facing criticism for her stances on border policy, abortion access, and healthcare. And on a superficial level, she's very fit for brat summer because she has a distinct, often verbose way of speaking, hearty and frequent laughter, and confident dance moves. So
Wow.
all of this is just basically saying, exactly. Doesn't matter what your policies are on the border. It doesn't matter if you're going to be deportation chief extraordinaire. All that matters is that you're laughing and kind of don't really care what anybody says while you do it.
I know. And
And
there was the whole drama around joy. That was the theme, joy. But I have to say, in my mind, the theme of this was cringe. Cringe, cringe, cringe. And I'll tell you why. It's because a lot of middle aged plus people are pretending that they're very, very youthful. And I know that age has been like an extraordinary shadow over American elections for the past 8 years, because first we had, the Trump ageism around Joe Biden, ageism around Trump, these old dudes, fighting it out, whatever. They're so old, they're so old. And now this obsession with youth, youth, youth. And it's like, it's a theme that I just cannot get behind. And it's so extremely embarrassing for really older people to constantly pretend to understand and have to explain to each other what it is. It kills the natural flow of what kind of youth culture is really about. It's so fabricated.
exactly.
Anyway, I can't get behind it. I don't know.
I also think, there's a darker side to it, which is this very cynical idea that let's kind of forget the impossible burden that Gen Z is now having to bear, what they've inherited, the climate crisis, unemployment, the market is a mess. There's this horrible inflation. They're caught in the clutches of a public health crisis, of a mental health crisis. But, let's sort of forget all about that and talk about how fun it is to frack. I mean, come on. So they don't even, like, you want to just create this faux sense of joy and infantilize a population and distract them from the fact that this joyful, happy candidate is really completely happy to frack on her own time, and that's really dark and cynical to me. And I think that's one of the reasons it also doesn't sit well with me at all,
Yeah.
to your point,
Yeah.
Bhakti.
I just want to quickly make the point that we're also picking and choosing aspects of this culture, right? There are these same Gen Z students out there protesting. There are these same students who are very much part of the climate justice movement. They are part of a culture that is really reclaiming language in a different way. This is the same culture that is being a lot more progressive when it comes to gender, sexual, and queer politics. We are not taking any of those things into account when we talk about all of this, just cherry picking parts of their culture that seems again can be used and appropriated.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I kind of, I haven't done this in like 15 years or something, but just because we were all going to hang out today and record this, I ended up reading a David Brooks column in the New York Times. Anyway, David Brooks writes this really staid, sad little column talking about how American culture is ever changing at astonishing speed. And Kamala Harris, she has just captured this cultural shift with joy and all these kind of things that we are discussing. So in a way, I was talking about this thing being part of the fawning over Kamala, the first wave. It still continues. The truth is, it still continues. But we should go to the next wave when it starts to get critical, though I guess at some point we're going to come back, we're going to circle back to this, because at the end of the debate Taylor Swift went and endorsed her, so that brought a whole other energy around youth and all that kind of stuff. But let's save that for our third wave conversation. Second wave was a little bit of critical thinking. She gave her CNN interview with Tim Walz, and there started to be a little bit of poking around what is Kamala's actual policy, and we got tiny bit of analysis and thinking around it. Did you all read any good pieces about that, or did it somehow just still stray from pure analysis?
I think a lot of the work that was published was not responding to Kamala at this moment. I think you had places like the Marshall Project and other more non-mainstream media that had a long history of documenting Kamala Harris's both positions as a prosecutor and kind of keeping record of what's happening. I think those outlets kind of did like a re-upping of, hey, listen, let's look at the record, which kind of lays out what she did both as a prosecutor, which again a lot of them see, which was very interesting. I think one of the things that I came away with was how all of these outlets were saying that while Kamala Harris is now positioning herself as the progressive prosecutor, when she started her career, there was nothing called the progressive prosecutor. In reality, if there's anything that describes Kamala Harris's record, it is the BRAT messiness, which means that there is no one way of thinking, there is no one consistent, there are some successes, very few successes, and mostly a prosecutor who's kind of towed the line. I think those were the kind of reporting that did, but again, it really didn't travel much. There wasn't much of analysis, but simply restating the record. Another piece that I found again that looks at, again, this was based out of UCLA, the department that kind of puts out where progressive candidates stand. And what was surprising to me is Kamala Harris was considered one of the most liberal politicians voting only right after Warren. And some of the most conservative Democrats happen to be people
Wow.
like Obama, who's clearly in the center. So for me, that information, again, this was information that was really buried. Nobody was talking about it. So kind of looking at her record before she becomes a vice president, she is one of the most liberal. Again, we have to place this within the context of what liberals means in the United
Right.
States, but was a liberal legislator just right behind Warren, making her the third most liberal candidate. So this was information that I didn't have till I started researching for our conversation. But I think apart from that, the criticality was almost absent, and there was no statistics in any of these pieces. There was no in-depth explanation of things. So what you really saw was the media not giving people the information that they needed.
So, Chitra, that's so interesting. And isn't it so bizarre how far she wants to stray from this liberal precedent and how she has basically cemented herself as a conservative candidate, right? And essentially, the media, the liberal media, has sort of been pushing her in this direction, not really pushing her in this direction, so to speak, but pushing the narrative, normalizing the narrative that essentially the choices that the American electorate has is between conservative candidate and an extremely conservative candidate. And so, I've read analysis pieces by Jonathan Chait. This was right after her DNC acceptance speech, which Chait said was the best acceptance speech he's ever heard. And the acceptance speech was essentially just an agenda of conservative talking points. And Chait has always said, and he writes for New York Magazine, right? So we know who his audience is. He's always said that Kamala should be heeding the concerns of the right and trying to appeal to them, that her speech should, and it did, appeal to undecided voters, basically voters who don't know whether they want to vote between Trump and Harris, not those who are concerned about not voting for Harris at all. And, in so doing, he does, the thing that the American media has long done, which is create a caricaturized, snowflakey progressive someone who's concerned about like gender on bathrooms and rainbows, and let's just dismiss them like there is sty in your eye, and let's talk to the real people who matter. And this enables the Democrats and the liberals to basically evade any sort of accountability and evade any engagement with the politics that the progressives are actually espousing. And he was thrilled, like everybody was, about how conservative she was. And the Democratic Party has long been pulled to the right by the Republicans. And her policies, such as they have been articulated from the DNC to CNN to the debate, are virtually indistinguishable from George Bush's policies. So this is all just completely normal and completely mainstream. And if you are, critiquing it, then you are some sort of bizarro person who just has to be pushed off to the side. So this is this complete sort of cementing of a sort of conservative capture of American politics in order to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, and my theory was that acceptance speech gave us the blueprint of this conservative agenda that really came home during the debate with Donald Trump, which was watched by millions and millions of people. And, it's unbearable, truly, because the truth is that the US is an empire, and what these people do and say is a life and death matter.
Right.
So when you had an acceptance speech that was applauded because it mentioned the word Palestine, despite the lies that she said, despite a fairly racist approach, and also talking about things that have been debunked and stuff like that, just the fact that she had said it was enough. It didn't matter what she said. She just had to hit certain like hashtags or keywords or something like that. But what she was saying about them never actually mattered.
It just struck me that we've also gaslighted people into categories now, right? Anybody who has any kind of critique is seen as a left-wing radical. On a bunch of moments, even like Trump says, Kamala Harris is like Marxist. It's very similar for someone who is like, he spends a lot of time working on India, where you're constantly called an urban Naxal. You're called you're called a Maoist. You're called a communist. You're called, as if these are some kind of a slurs or disqualifying qualities that some person has. And again, anyone who has been even supportive of Kamala Harris but has a little bit of criticism is automatically grouped as these insane left wing radical bros who do not understand politics, or that politics is all about reconciliation, or politics is about, it's not about perfection. So I think it's also the way in which language itself is kind of being pulled towards this very egregious place of violence that we all are supposed to accept and deal with it, because that's how the world works.
Absolutely. And two big kind of hypocritical elements in this, where they're just so, and the journalists and the critics and the intelligentsia absolutely do not want to address this at all, is they are saying how she is soft on Palestine, she's looking for a ceasefire, whereas Biden is the actual Zionist. I'm sorry, she's been in those rooms. She has been part of the rooms making the decisions on Palestine. She's part of those arm transfer decisions, arms sales, all those things that have been going on. To pretend that somehow she operates as an entity that's separate from Joe Biden. I mean, she's an acting vice president.
Yes.
It's absolutely absurd. And the second point is let's talk about the two assassination attempts now on Donald Trump. And both times, Kamala Harris has had to make a statement, Biden the first time, and the second time around, Harris. Violence has no place in our country. Violence has no place in our country. Every time I hear that, I think, am I in a lunatic asylum? What is happening? This is a woman, at her acceptance speech, she had some line like where she says the US will be
fighting force.
Lethal
fighting force.
The most lethal.
The most lethal fighting force. Also in the debate, she said, Tim Walz and I are proud gun owners.
Yeah.
And yet violence has no place. You're running around with guns in your home or whatever. You're promoting gun ownership, gun usage. I mean, what is this? What high level of gaslighting is this? And how can the media not take even a second to work through these issues? To just say, Maybe let's think of the fact that she is in the room when they're making decisions on Palestine. Maybe she is in the room when they're talking about, becoming a lethal fighting force. She didn't come up with those words. Her speechwriters did. And then the media thinks it's cool to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the other thing that she did was literally shut down protesters, shut them up when with her "I'm speaking" comment. So
So
she
cruel.
does not, I mean, come on, she doesn't want to engage. And the worst part is, I've seen that "I'm speaking" meme on t-shirts around Brooklyn now. So people are wearing it as a sign of, I mean, I'm assuming, shut up about genocide. And Suchitra, you were saying about people being dismissed as a radical left. There is a new trend where the radical left is now being dismissed as MAGA. It's like, oh, you have a critique of Kamala and you're saying all this. Yeah, you're straight up right wing. Like, you want Donald Trump to come. So instead of holding our politicians accountable, because I mean, accountability is a part of the job. You are a politician, you are accountable, you earn these votes, you are not entitled to them. Who becomes accountable? Who's going to be blamed if the Harris Walls tickets loses this president? Progressives, American Muslims, these are the people who will be blamed and held accountable. It has completely shifted into this crazy world of lack of accountability there, and we have to see our politicians as human, and oh, they're entitled to be messy. And what is this? It's a job. I don't care who Kamala is in her private life. I'm
You want
sorry,
to
I don't.
exist in a moral blur. It's all about generating a moral blur
Right.
where your everything you think is up for questioning. Are you sure? Do you want Palestine issue? Do you want to make such a big deal? What if we get Trump? Oh, do you want to make fracking such a big issue? What if we get Trump? And really, at this point, we need to talk about the debate and really break down how right wing Kamala had to go. The entire debate was framed by everything that Donald Trump says. All it was, she might have done well, she might have dominated, as the media called it. She might have put him in his place, poked at his narcissism. I agree with all that. I think she did a good job. She stood up to him. He's a
Yeah.
classic bully. He's relentless. He's a non-hesitant. He makes endless quips. He's happily racist. What did she do? How did she meet the challenge? Just as racist. I'm just as right wing. For starters, she's like, 200 Republicans are now with me. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, which party are you working for? What is the agenda of your party?
Including Dick Cheney. I mean, what are you talking about? How are you parading this? How are you parading this as an endorsement? It's a shame. All these extremely fringe Republicans and extremely fringe conservative policies she's wearing as a badge of honor.
And also, I just want to quickly bring this up is that saying that if you don't support Kamala, you have Trump, forgets how incredibly shitty the Trump presidency was for people of color, even people of color who come from immense privilege. I remember walking around in the beginning of COVID, around the mask mandate was just put in place, walking around with my mask on to the bakery next door that was still functioning to get like a loaf of bread. And I saw this white man. This is the heart of New York City. This is not your boondocks. And I said, "Can you wear your mask?" And this man just turned around and said the most awful racial thing to me. And this was a place that I had called my home. And I remember looking at the bakery staff and saying, "Are you going to do something?" And they just stood. I remember the number of times we called. New York has a Human Rights Commissioner's office. We're trying to get on the call, trying to get them to get the NYPD to file cases where brown and black women were being targeted in COVID. They refused to file charges. I literally saw a white woman down University Place heading towards NYU call cops on a black mother in the middle of COVID, simply on the corner of 8th and University Place. And literally, some of us had to go and say, "Why are you doing this?" The fact that all of this was erased, has been erased. And somehow we are told that we now have to make a choice between Trump or sitting vice president, who is actively enabled the genocide of the Palestinian people. And for us
Actively.
to be gaslight into this thing as if like, do you not realize what we went through? And again, I come from so much more privilege than most people. I can't imagine how other black and brown bodies were policed. And for them, it's just I just I'm just losing my shit even as I'm speaking. because it's like you do not understand what our communities went through. And
Mhm.
for you
Yeah.
to make this is so egregious in so many
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in the thing that makes me extraordinarily angry is her constantly claiming she comes from a migrant background. Okay. And both her parents were migrants and she's middle class. And then 2 minutes later, she's going to fix the border. She's going to deport people. She's going to put more violence at the border. What is this? And how is the media not able to engage with this particular, her particular racism? On the one hand, here, let me pull out my migrant card and appeal to that world somehow, but at the same time I will actively engage more violence at the border. I will actively go ahead and have this anti-migration agenda. I mean, there is no moment in the world's history where we have to be this cruel, this savage. There is no need. There is simply no need. The absolute, opportunism in every stage of this particular campaign, with terms of her race, in terms of her identity, in terms of her background, and the lack of scruples around the policy that goes completely against those precise things she claims are her strength is what, it just astounds me and it upsets me deeply. It's
Yeah.
just wrong the way this has been going on.
Yeah, I agree, Bhakti. That's something that really angers me. And I can see the sort of difference between the reporting on Vivek Ramaswamy when he had these anti migrant policies simply
Oh my
because he
God.
ran as a Republican, and
Yeah.
none of that critique for Kamala simply because she's running as a liberal. She's supposedly a liberal. And to your point about her position on the border and her identity, she does sort of run and trade on her South Asian identity as well, often telling stories about her mother and how her mother raised her and how she came from India and all of this stuff. It turns out, according to the Washington Post, well, according to the Pew Research Center, that Indians have come to make up the third largest group of undocumented immigrants in the United States,
Of course.
at about 725,000 such
Wow.
immigrants. And this is her policy towards her own people. But I think, in a perverse way, this is the ultimate American ruling class dream, right? You come in
Yeah.
here and you just police your own people so we don't have to anymore. So
Mhm.
that she's the embodiment of it in a very depressing way.
Have either of you encountered an article comparing Biden and Trump's migration policies? Is there a significant difference? Am I being just a killjoy here, or is there going to be a significant difference within the framework of how migration is dealt with in the US?
I think the only place that I found a pretty decent comparison was from last May that the BBC
Hmm.
did, which kind
Okay.
of lays out what was Biden's policies and what was Trump's policies. I think in American media I haven't found any, but I think in reality, do you know what Title 42 is?
No.
No.
So Title 42 is a law that you use during public health crisis or emergencies. And
Hmm.
during Trump presidency, Trump used Title 42 to round up and deport over 200,000 migrants. And
Hmm.
this was reported quite extensively during that time, but because it was in the middle of the pandemic, while it was quite significantly reported against Trump, because during that time you did see the New York Times and others report against Trump quite extensively, I don't think the reporting really was not something that was part of people's actual consciousness, because we were going through a real pandemic and there were other stories that were being overshadowed.
Hmm.
Now, Title 42 was used again. A public health emergency law was used to round up and deport 200,000 undocumented immigrants. Now, Biden said that these laws would have to stay. And when Biden came to power, they used the exact same law to deport over 2 million people.
Wow.
So this was kept. The other
Wow.
place where you really saw the Biden Harris administration double down is the southern border. Kamala Harris directly goes to the southern border and says, please do not come. Do not come, do not seek asylum, which again goes against the international law that very clearly establishes laws which says that people have the right to flee and then have the right to ask for asylum at the place of entry. So again, this was something that
Wow.
was What she said was clearly against established international laws, but again, the US has a long history of really going against
Mhm.
it. The third most important thing that they did in this case was the family separation, and
Hmm.
this was significantly reported during the Trump
Hmm.
presidency. Some argue that this became slightly better, but the Biden administration really didn't do much beyond. Maybe they didn't become more violent. Again, we don't know because I don't see a lot of in depth
Nobody wants to cover it.
the New York Times did not cover. The reality is that the New York Times did not cover all of these three instances that they covered as aggressively under the Trump presidency. They did not do a good job of covering the border crisis under the Biden. It was almost taken for granted that when Biden came to power, they would follow through what they did, and in most of the cases, they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a choice between fascism and then, pretty fascism. Fascism that you can, fascism light, yeah, fascism that will help you sleep at night. Yeah, cozy fascism. Sorry, cozy fascism.
Joyful fascism to a Taylor Swift kind of melody, like we dance, and it's super fun. Can I make the same exact point that I kind of keep on harping on about migration to this idea of racism, right? It's a well known thing that Donald Trump is an unabashed racist. He
Yeah.
says whatever the hell he wants, and he riles people up, and and as we know during the debate, he was as always absolutely unhinged, and talked about how Haitian migrants are eating people's pets. Okay, and this was disgusting and 100% the type of racism where you want to paint the other, the migrant, the black person, the brown person, as a savage, right? And because he was so outlandish in what he claimed, it immediately sort of drowned out the kind of casual racism that is
Right.
so part of Kamala Harris and the Democrats in general. Yes, we get it. She is black, she is brown, whatever you want to say. She's a person of color, a woman of color, all those kinds of things. But as he went out of his way to prove that Haitians are migrants, are savages, she went out of her way to prove that Palestinians are savages, right? And as usual, she mentioned, this was her third mention of the Hamas mass rape that has been debunked not once but several times, that has been discredited. Yet she brought that up, of course. And then I just want to say that structurally, if we start to think about her record as a prosecutor, this is someone who has prosecuted young black men, young black boys in her career, and that even though she may not be a racist at some individual level, she's part of a structural framework that really does not generate change around this for black and brown communities, whether we're thinking of migrants, whether you're thinking of African Americans. So I'm so upset at the way in which this is glossed over, just because we have a lunatic on the other side who goes on and says absolutely insane things. But she is playing with the same tropes. Those are
Right.
exactly the same tropes. Savages, and how to be strict on at the borders on migration, how to be strict on everything. And environmental protections, if we're going to
Right.
talk about that, that's racism too. If we can't think of climate justice and think about racial capitalism in the same framework, that's racism too. So where are we, with her and this race issue? It's absurd.
But it also reminds you back the Obama moment. Remember in his first time Obama was running, when he was running against the war hero. Remember this moment during the
McCain, John
Yeah,
McCain,
McCain.
McCain.
when somebody said, "Oh, Obama is a Muslim. He's an Arab." And McCain says, "No, he's a good man. He's a
Oh, yeah,
family."
I remember this.
And it was this thing
I
where
remember
it was
this.
like, "Oh my God."
Unbelievable.
And what's interesting is that that clip is now being brought back to show
Mhm.
that, look, at one point in time, America was civil. We were
Yeah.
civil and
Oh,
we united in throwing people under the bus. Nobody understood the fact that McCain was not being generous when he said,
Mhm.
Obama, no, ma'am, he's not. Yeah, he says, no, ma'am, he's not an Arab, he's not a Muslim, he's a good man, or something like that, right?
Wow.
The idea being that Obama is a good man, but he's not an Arab, he's not a
Of
Muslim.
course.
The idea being, and I think that is American,
Of
the
course. And remember Kamala when they were competing, who loves Israel more? Donald
oh
Trump
my
said, "You hate
God.
Israel." So she so she was like, no, all my life, that's all I've done is devoted my life to Israel. And then he said, well, you hate Arabs too. She hates Arabs too. And and then all she had to do was like, I love Israel and I love Arabs too. But she didn't bother to defend. She wanted to let that lie. I love Israel, not the Arabs. And I'm sorry, this is a kind of a stealth game. And, at least I'm getting to say this here, but nobody wants to catch this. Nobody wants to engage with this. And I don't understand. And there's all this stuff now about cat ladies, and I don't know, people I don't even know what that meme is. But there was this cartoon, the New Yorker had a cartoon with a happy cat lady. Do you know what I'm talking about? And yeah, and as this cartoon, everybody was so appreciative, and this is so feminist, this is so amazing, we can have all this joy, you don't have to bear children, and you can live with your cats and you can be happy and all this kind of stuff. All fine and well, okay, all within, of course, very much framed within this sort of liberal white feminism type of framework, to put it academically. But the other thing is, it made me think, like, where are the satirical, sharp, incisive cartoonists? Where are they? Whatever happened to some satire? Everybody just lives in fear. You cannot say anything against this candidate, this person. It's really kind of crazy.
Yeah, because that makes you the problem. You're the problem. You have to be held accountable. They can evade it all they want. It's your problem. You have to be held accountable. So it's this very crazy shifting of responsibility and onto the individual, onto the voter, which is, I cannot believe that it has been executed with such perfection, to the point where everybody is so scared of the consequences of speaking out and what they will be labeled as and how they will be perceived, that you're right, all criticism, including cartoons, which until you brought up, I hadn't really thought about what a void that is leaving, that kind of satire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
just,
mean, I know we have late night talk shows where the US satire market, mocking people, imitating, all those kinds of things. I know that that's where it's there. But that one image that generates, that's like fire, that one cartoon image that mocks the
right.
politician, which is a long tradition in which the US has been active for many years. It's dead now. It's completely dead.
But also, when you said, it's the burden, the thing is shifted, but that's
Mhm.
the world that we've been living in since 9/11. The,
Yeah,
I
the,
know.
the Patriot Act shifted the burden of proof from
right.
the state proving that someone is a terrorist to unilaterally designating that people as forever prisoners. The language of Guantanamo is forever prisoners. Someone in Guantanamo who's picked up and doesn't know why he was picked up then has to defend himself for a crime he didn't know what crime he committed. And that's exactly the kind of rhetoric that we've placed in that has kind of pervaded our life, where the burden of proof is no longer on Kamala Harris to show us that she is the right candidate. The
Right.
burden of proof is for us now to say everything with, we are not anti-Semites. We don't like, it's not. We don't have anything against the Jewish people. We don't have anything against this. We are not racist. We are not anti-black. Frame it in all of this
Yeah.
before we come to the critique, because they
So
have now.
serious. I mean, everything you say, these are such serious issues. They impact
Yes,
us, our
exactly.
children. They're so serious. All we have left after the debate is like 10 puff pieces on Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris. And then, Madhuri, you and I were chatting, I think it was The Guardian or somewhere, where, like, right there, somewhere, two-thirds after an article, just so excited that Taylor Swift has endorsed her and what this means, 240 million followers, my goodness. It's like she had already won. And then you see what the actual polls are saying. Like 17% of the people, of the fans of Taylor Swift, may agree with her and vote for the candidate she endorsed. I mean,
Wow.
it's so sad.
Oh my
It's so
God.
sad. Yes, she got a big wave up. Then there was some false debates around she shouldn't have done it at that time. She took the win, she stole the thunder from Kamala and all this kind of nonsense. But I mean, how is it, how the state of discourse is so low? And then the next day, people pull up poll numbers about Taylor Swift and her actual influence, and it's not that exciting. This is the sad part, because she is sort of Republican princess. She's like Southern white girl.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
haven't followed her career. I get it. It's good for her that she has come, her journey. I applaud it. Good for her. But I don't know what it does for the journey of this country necessarily.
Yeah, and that point that you made about how her endorsement has moved the needle, not at all, is so depressing, because I feel like, or maybe I have been led to believe that there were these surges of popularity and narrative control that the Harris campaign was benefiting from her anointing, being, nominated the candidate, the presidential candidate, to her being anointed as BRAT. What has happened with all of that momentum? Nothing. Nothing. They are polling neck and neck in all of the swing states, in the South, in the Rust Belt. What's going to happen? Are young voters swayed by this brat stuff? I don't think so. I also read this. I was just mentioning just at the beginning to you privately that I read this quite depressing couple of reports that young Gen Z men are actually leaning more conservative. So, what is actually happening? I have to pull it up. I think I read it on Newsweek,
Remind
but
me, who is Gen Z? How old are these people? How old are they supposed to be?
I think they're born between 1996 or 97 and 2012. That's
Okay,
the,
big
yeah.
window. All right.
Yes, and most of them coming of age in the post 9/11 world, in an internet world. So these men, I think, are leaning conservative because of this sort of perceived emasculation.
Indeed.
And I'm not
Yeah.
sure that we have been able to successfully unpack or articulate the negative effects of patriarchy, or what patriarchy actually means to them. And instead, we are just choosing to sort of go down this, I can be a childless cat lady and be happy. And that's the level of discourse we are willing to have, rather than what it is about patriarchy that makes it so harmful as a method of
Absolutely.
control for men, women, and everyone.
I'm gonna quickly say that I will have to say that she's been good on abortion rights.
Sure.
you know I think she can use that to just go a little bit left, little bit push past the center, to just move the needle on sexism, patriarchy, all those kinds of things. I think, why not? Why not? You're there, you're the first woman candidate,
Right.
and it's all in the air. I think she can stop with this joy nonsense and say something real you know
Joy nonsense. I mean, it's this weird conflation of white feminism and this bizarre fantasy. There were these pictures going around on social media where she's like looking at his number of cakes, and she's like, really excited by these cakes, and she's so happy and she's pointing at them. And there is a wonderful thing about seeing a woman so excited about food in this era, particularly. But I'm thinking, and it's like, oh, she's so joyful. This is so amazing. But it feels to me just so Marie Antoinette coded, because she's literally looking at cake while most Americans can't afford bread.
Yeah,
And no, but let's be happy when we look at cake. I mean, what is this? This just feels like a complete deflection from
absolutely.
the issues at hand, or thinking about systemic racism. Another article that I read, unfortunately I can't remember where, told how many times the words systemic racism or racism appeared in these debates, acceptance speeches. In 2020, that was it, right? Like 18, 20 mentions, no, more mentions than that. And this time it fell, to like maybe mentioned 2, 3 times. So we're done. We're past it. We've solved racism. That's the thing for 2020. And now we just need to focus on how a woman of color can nuke other people too. Come on. Like, a woman of color can also be commander in
It's a
chief.
feminist genocide. You know, it's cool.
Exactly.
It's great because it's feminist. Oh,
Precisely.
painful. Racism is cool because it's feminist racism. It's from a woman of color.
Exactly. So what is the legacy of BLM? What is the legacy of Me Too? Nothing.
Because we've reduced everything to aesthetics, memes, and virality, and evacuated the politics out of it. But, I'm also just thinking, what does it mean for us to also borrow and actually plagiarize from the idea of radical joy that is very much a part of Black feminist
Right.
movement? It
Absolutely.
is very different. You know,
Very
um,
different.
I think the first time I heard the word joy was almost 18 years ago through Arundhati Roy, who kind of talks about joy. She talks about how reading Black feminists, and she talks about joy in that context. And she says, what does it mean? And I was like, huh, what? Joy? What does it mean? And then, that takes you to a path where you understand that joy is an act of living. It's an act of, but it is radical feminist politics. It's not about smiling. It's not about saying you're joyful. And it's also plagiarizing, and not even plagiarizing. I think it's cannibalizing
Yeah.
a way of living, a way of protest, a way of resistance. It's like Beyonce in Black Panther saying
Right.
resistance and being. That's exactly what it is, right? I mean,
With the Black
Renaissance. Yeah.
Panther diapers information, the diaper suits that she made so popular.
Yeah. Yeah.
Terrible
Yeah.
times.
What a, and those horrible t-shirts like we must all be feminists or whatever, right? Like, which
I
is all
know.
being replaced now by this like I'm speaking
Yeah,
t-shirts or whatever it is. It's just this horrible conflation, defanging, I think like you said, cannibalizing of truly transformative progressive politics, in order to just sort of
yeah,
further your own ruthless pursuit of self-interest and your own entitlement to power.
exactly.
um
And all we can say is, hey, Kamala, you might be speaking, but what are you really saying? And who are you saying it to? You know?
yeah.
And anyway, we are coming to the end of our time, but we have to brace ourselves for 2 more months of intensive gaslighting. The needle is not moving on the analysis, on the fact checking. Journalism is unethical at this stage. And, for all those people feeling like they're going mad, I just want to say it's not you, it's the media.